Is this thing on? Welcome back to Big Mouth, and fancy seeing you here. And you are very welcome, my friends, and especially my enemies. Come in, sit down, no touching. I don't do the touching. And welcome to Thursday's, yes, Thursday's edition of the DCEU Daily. Today is a jam-packed edition of the DCEU Daily. I'll be reading you out an interview with Birds of Prey and the emancipation of one Harley Quinn writer, Cristina Hodson's interview. Yes, I'll be reading that out from Heroic Hollywood. I'll then be reading you out an interview full of reading outs today, and I'm not very good at that, am I? But anyway, we're going to attempt it. So then we read out an interview from Damon Lindelof, the writer-creator of Watchmen. And then finally, we'll be discussing Diane Nelson's comments on Twitter that Jeff Johns ain't no friend of hers. That is massive. And we will be discussing that in the final part of today's show. But first of all, let's see what the multi-talented Cristina Hodson has to say about her Birds of Prey movie. Birds of Prey writer Cristina Hodson wanted to find a fun way to bring film to life. The Birds of Prey screenwriter says she wanted to find a fun way of bringing things. Why do they repeat themselves on these bloody articles? Anyway, many fans are already wondering how Birds of Prey will address the events of Suicide Squad and how Harley Quinn winds up with the Birds of Prey. Instead of being dragged around by the Joker, a new interview with Birds of Prey writer Cristina Hodson revealed that the film is going to be its own story rather than tied to Harley Quinn's previous exploits in Suicide Squad. This follows DC and Warner Bros.' new direction of standalone storytelling rather than aiming for an interconnected cinematic universe. The Birds of Prey writer revealed to Total Film that Margot Robbie always wanted the film to be a Harley Quinn plus Gil story. Since the Birds of Prey actress is a fan of the comics, luckily Warner Bros. And DC were flexible in allowing screenwriter Cristina Hodson in crafting a new fun ways that make the film feel like its own adventure in the DC universe. Read what else the writer had to say about the Birds of Prey film. Margot knew she wanted to tell a Harley Quinn plus Gil story. She knew she wanted a girl gang. She wanted Harley to have new friends. She's a comic book fan, obviously. You know, it's not a traditional team-up, so then it was about finding fun, inventive ways of doing that. Warners were very supportive in terms of letting me go off the leash. I fell in love with this character and then all of those other new characters, and I just created a brand new story that felt like its own thing, and that doesn't have to feel like it follows one or the other. What do you think about the Birds of Prey approach? This is very, 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 very interesting interview with Cristina Hodson because it really does confirm what we saw in the poster. A big presence for Harley Quinn with little versions of the Birds of Prey scattered around her. What does that mean? It means what we always knew, that Harley Quinn and Birds of Prey and Emancipation of one Harley Quinn was always a Margot Robbie plus Harley Quinn vehicle. You knew that from the very beginning, but you saw that poster and lost your shit. Now I'm starting to understand why people don't like this poster. Two reasons. Too colourful. How ironic, how illogical, how hypocritical people are. Man of Steel, poster too dark. Batman v Superman, poster too dark. Tone of movie too dark. I hate DC, why is it so dark? Blah, blah, blah. You see a bright, lavish poster and you criticise it for being too bright because you've always got to find something. Superman Returns, Lois Lane is too young. Superman Returns, not enough action. Man of Steel, Lois Lane is too old. Too much action. You just get to trying to look for things to put things down. But we know the agenda's scattered around the DC fandom from non-DC fans. We know that Zack Snyder fans are more loyal to Zack Snyder than the DC world of movies, and they're putting movies against each other. We know that. We know the extreme right are very intimidated by what Margot Robbie is doing, but Margot Robbie is doing nothing wrong. It's very refreshing to have a predominant female production company. It's very exciting to have two female DC-led movies where the females ain't coming out putting down men. Gal Gadot, Patty Jenkins and Margot Robbie. Talented people who want everyone to come and see their movies. We're not talking about Brie Larson and Disney here. So I'm very excited for this movie. I've heard nothing to put me off of it. And in fact, Scott Mendelson was coming out with some spoilers Apparently Hardy kills someone with a pencil. So, if that's true, if he's not being sarcastic, isn't it funny? Mr. Mendelsohn kind of stands up and says that he supports female-led movies and TV shows. But when they're not for Disney, and when they're not far extreme left, right, he doesn't like them, right? He's trying to poison it. It's just trying to poison people's minds against Warner Brothers. And it just isn't going to work. Now, coming up next is an interview with Damon Lindelof, the writer-creator of the brand new Watchmen TV show. So Damon Lindelof, the co-creator of Lost and The Leftovers, was the total creator of The Leftovers, by the way, and the writer-creator of this new Watchmen TV show has been interviewed by E! Entertainment. Yes, E! Entertainment, you know, keeping up with the Kardashians. Anyway, let's see what he's got to say. Damon Lindelof gives his first deep dive interview for HBO's Watchmen. Robert Redford has been president for 28 years. Yes, Robert Redford has been president for 28 years in this weird reality, in this Watchmen TV show. Cell phones and the internet are outlawed. Fossil fuels are a thing of the past. Costume heroes were popular, then banned. Police wear masks to protect their identities and cannot use their guns without a dispatcher unlocking them first. Reputations were issued for a racial injustice and our country remains ever divided. This is the alternate history of America, of Watchmen, HBO's upcoming drama series from writer-producer Damon Lindelof, Lost, The Leftovers. That's a bombastic mix of inspiration from Alan Moore's unfilmable 1986 graphic novel infused with new characters, social political themes. It's so wildly ambitious and original, it's like nothing I've seen before, and also addresses important issues, says director Nicole Castle of Lindelof's script. The story is set 3 decades after the events in Moore's Watchmen text. Most of the graphic novel's iconic characters are apparently dead, or in hiding, though a character we suspect is Adrian Veidt, aka Ozymandias, is kicking around in a mansion and played with gilded smugness by Jeremy Irons, great actor, and the staggering powerful Dr. Manhattan. Let's start again. The staggering powerful Dr. Manhattan is rumoured to be hanging out on Mars. I'll be talking about this later on because I'm not happy about certain situations. The focus instead is on a new character, the reason I want to talk about it. Angela Abar, an Oklahoma police detective, The Leftovers, Regina King. By the way, I have no issue with Regina King. She's a great quality actor, and it's great that she's part of this show, and she's a lead in this TV show. With the secret superhero identity of Sister Night, Abar is investigating the re-emergence of a white supremacist terrorist group, inspired by the long-deceased moral absolutist Rorschach. Yes, so no Rorschach either, right? Below, Lindelof gives his first in-depth interview about Watchmen, as well as to discuss another title for the first time, The Hunt, a film he co-wrote with Nick Hughes. That likewise touched the topical political division. Yeah. Right, we don't need to talk about that. Entertaining, right. I asked my therapist, right, what did he ask? Right. After The Leftovers, you probably could have done whatever you wanted. What made Watchmen right, aside from wanting a very difficult job? Damon Lindelof. I ask my therapist that question on a weekly basis now. Why Watchmen? First and foremost, this is something I love and something that made a very profound impression on me when I read it, when I was 13 years old. In the same way, I wanted to work on a Star Trek movie, Star Trek Into Darkness, and an Alien movie, Prometheus. This is something from my childhood that I carry a tremendous amount of nostalgia for. The fantasy I indulged as a young man was maybe one day I can tell Watchmen stories. The first 2 times Lindelof was offered the opportunity to write a Watchmen adaptation, it was incredibly tempting. I said no for various reasons. First and foremost, the timing didn't feel right. Director Zack Snyder had just made his Watchmen movie. And secondly, revisiting the source material meant adapting something that I knew was so perfect. I knew the best job I could do adapting the original Watchmen was just being a really good cover band. So is there a way to take this thing I love and be inspired by it, not erase it, but build upon its foundations? That depends on whether I have the right idea. The idea started to come with what to do with Watchmen, and then it didn't really feel like a decision anymore, but something I felt compelled to do. That sounds arrogant and full of hubris, But when I haven't made choices based on that feeling, things haven't turned out so well. Because then you're doing it for the wrong reasons. But when you get really inspired, you have to chase it, even if it leads to ruin. You said that the project is not a sequel and not a remake, but a remix. And I think some are confused by that. Can we accept that what happened in the comic film happened in the past of your world? That if we reread the graphic novel or watch Snyder's movie, that we have a firm handle on what occurred 30 years ago in this story? Yes. Look, the new series certainly fits into the sequel box and definitely doesn't fit into the reboot box. We treat the original 12 issues as canon. They all happened. We haven't done any re-envisionist history, but we can maneuver in between the cracks and crevices and find new stories there. But for all the reasons you just articulated, we wanted to make sure our first episode felt like the beginning of a new story rather than a continuation of an old story. That's one of my issues. That's what I think a sequel is. The continuation of an old story. After the Television Critic Association press conference this summer, some stories claimed Robert Redford was actually in your show because the president of HBO's Watchmen for the last 20 years is Robert Redford. But the actor is not appearing, right? Were there any concerns about making a real person the president in your show and depicting their real-life liberal ideas as leading to more toleration society without that person actually being involved? The short answer is yes. I had a lot of reservations about a lot of the creative choices made in the show. I don't think any of the choices were made without reservations and conversations, and ultimately a decision I'm not entirely sure I'm able to defend. Every decision I made, but I'll be able to explain why I made it. We had the conversation you're suggesting, but the world of the Watchmen is so heightened, so clearly it's an alternate history that will be clear to everyone. We're not talking about the real Robert Redford. More importantly, the way we handle this story, you can't blame Robert Redford for everything that's happened in the world. The show says Redford has a liberal ideology, much like the actual Robert Redford, and he was incredibly well-intentioned in terms of the legislation. He passed in the America that he wanted to create, but he doesn't mean it worked out the way he wanted it to, and that's not on him. That's on us. Well, there's some interesting talking points here, isn't there? Can you tell us more about this alternative world beyond the lack of cell phones or internet, which of course are also helpful to eliminate from the screenwriting perspective when telling dramatic stories? Yes, we're living in a world where fossil fuels have been eliminated as a power source. All the cars are zero emissions and run on electricity or fuel cells, largely thanks to the innovations of Dr. Manhattan decades earlier. There's also this legislation that passed, victims of racial violence legislation, which is a form of reparations that are colloquially known as Redfordations. It's a lifetime tax exemption for victims of and the direct descendants of designated areas of racial injustice throughout America's history. The most important of which, as it relates to our show, is the Tulsa Massacre in 1921. That legislation had a ripple effect into another piece of legislation, DOPA, the Defense of Police Act, which allows police to hide their face behind masks because they were being targeted by terrorist organisations for protecting the victims of the initial act. So good luck sound biting that. I saw the opening of your pilot depicting the massacre, then Googled the Tulsa 1921, and like you said in another interview, I was surprised and embarrassed that I hadn't heard of this tragedy before. Why was that incident in particular, and Tulsa in general, the right setting for your story? Like you just said, my ignorance for the fact that it happened made me feel compelled to educate others, and I could go around to my friends or put it on social media, but I feel the biggest platform that's been afforded me is I get to make television shows that potentially millions are going to watch. And for a show like Watchmen, which already had a built-in audience that has nothing to do with me, to use Watchmen as a delivery of a mechanism for this piece of erased history felt right, as long as it was presented in a non-exploitative way. Also, the superhero genre always feels like it takes place in New York, Gotham City or Metropolis, and Gotham City and Metropolis are just New York paradigms. So I was like, what does a superhero show look like in Oklahoma? That idea was interesting to me in terms of what it would look and feel like, and kinds of people would populate it. I also just felt that tickle in my gut that was like, do it there. That tickle has not always steered me right, but it is the thing that makes me do things I do. like ending Lost where everyone's in a church and everyone's dead, eh, Damon? In some ways, there's also the added challenge of not just doing Watchmen, but doing a superhero deconstruction story, when they have so many other deconstruction stories in recent years. From Kick-Ass to Deadpool to Boys, did that factor into your thinking as well? How do you break new ground on super anti-heroes when even that is now common? That's a great question. It's almost like the truly subversive thing that you could do right now is to celebrate a superhero, because the dark version or deconstructed version is so in the culture. And by the way, in the mid-80s, Watchmen and The Dark Knight both did it. So the idea of deconstructing a superhero myth is 30 years old. Well done, Damon. Fully aware of that, I started to think that for Watchmen, maybe a more interesting point is to think about masking and authority and policing as an adjunct to superheroes. In Watchmen, nobody has superpowers. The only superpowered individual is Dr. Manhattan, and he's not currently on the planet. In The Boys, you have superpowered individuals in capes that can shoot lasers out of their eyes and fly around and have feats of strength and turn invisible. Nobody on Watchmen can do that. So I felt like we wouldn't be deconstructing the superhero myth, because all the characters in Watchmen are just humans who play dress up. It would be more interesting to ask psychological questions about why do people dress up? Why is hiding their identity a good idea? And there are interesting themes to explore here. When you are masked, both hides you and shows you at the same time, because your mask is actually a reflection in yourself. What's the trauma in an individual that goes into the mask they wear? All that felt Watchmen-y to me. Again, these are not original ideas, but ones I thought were timely when we all have these different identities in code now. Interesting. Yeah, because we all have these social media names, like I'm Big Mouth on YouTube and things like that. Really interesting. You have a sprawling cast. Is there somebody you want to single out who particularly surprised you with their take on the material? I can't say enough about the amazing things about Regina King. I knew he was going to talk about Regina. It was so obvious. The opportunity to make her the star of the show is one of the reasons this was worth doing. It's not that Regina hasn't had opportunities to show the world what an incredible actor she is, but to be at the centre of a show is a pretty big deal. She's able to surprise me constantly with her choices as a performer. Even though I worked with her on Leftovers for a season, I've seen everything she's ever done. She going back to 227 and Southland. Yeah, she was amazing in Southland. The Southland was an amazing show. Yet she's still able to make choices that make me go, what? I also want to say that I'm constantly delighted, and I'm not a person that experiences the emotion of delight in my life, by what Jeremy Irons is doing in this show. I've not only been a fan of his for decades, but I'm just delighted of the choices he's making. And that's not the exclusion of anything that Jean Smart does, but she's not introduced until the third episode. Tim Blake Nelson knocked my socks off. And last but not least, and again, there are others I'm not mentioning that are fantastic. Louis Gossett Jr., you don't get to experience him much in the pilot, but starting in the second episode and all through the season, he's a living legend. And it was truly a gift to have him say our words. I reread your 2018 Instagram letter to fans about doing Watchmen. I remember this. This was a monologue. And he was kind of apologising to Alan Moore and saying it was amazing. We also intend to revisit the past century of consumed and venturing through a surprisingly familiar set of eyes. It's here we'll be taking our greatest risk. Does that refer to the fact that King's character is an original creation, yet the apparent focus of the story? Does that refer to the fact that King's character is an original creation? I wasn't sure if it was not, or if she is. Yet the apparent focus of the story, I'm not sure. Even after watching the pilot, I know what that means. Very insightful. You should be in exactly the place that you are at the end of the pilot, which is, I'm not sure what he's talking about yet. By the end of the 6th episode, it will be clear who I was talking about. There won't be any space for debate. I think people will start to theorise who I was talking about prior to the 6th episode, but that's the one that makes the subtext text. Landing 9 Inch Nails' Trent Reznor as your composer was a big get for a TV show. He gets to such a specific style, and the music makes pretty big impact. What's that collaboration been like? It's Trent and the Atticus Ross that do all their composition work together. We were talking hypothetically about composers, and I love the composers that I worked with in the past, like Michael Giacchino, yeah, legend, on Lost. With The Leftovers, I wanted the show to sound different from Lost, so we got Max Richter, who was amazing. When talking about Watchmen, I had to start all over again with somebody I haven't worked with before because the music is a big part of making shows unique and different from one another. At the top of my wish list were Trent and Atticus. I called HBO and said, look, they haven't done TV, but it's worth an inquiry. And HBO drama executive Francesca Orsi said, this is the weirdest thing, but reps called us this morning and asked about Watchmen within 48 hours of that call. Trent and Atticus and I were in the room together, and it turns out they're huge Watchmen fans. They signed up on Faith and Faith alone. They get the scripts at the same time the actors do. They started writing the music even before we shot the pilot, so we can get a sense in our heads of what it would sound like. It's been incredible. They're doing some cool stuff. I can't talk about stuff inside the world of Watchmen musically that I think is going to be really cool. They go deep. I think perhaps your boldest move I've heard about so far is Regina said about an interview we did that you're not only diving into very hot button topics, but you're handling them in such a way that viewers can read whatever they want into the meaning. You're avoiding moralising at a time when popular entertainment is terrified of being misunderstood, because such a willingness online to accuse artists of bad intentions, is that an accurate read? And does that kind of freak you out? The read is completely accurate, and yeah, it freaks me out. But when I'm freaked out is when I get excited. I can't write or create from a nervous, scared space. If you stop and try to talk yourself out of doing something that might be upsetting or might make people onerous or confused or uncomfortable, you're never going to do anything interesting. You have to jump in with some degree of forethought and responsibility, and then afterwards you can ask yourself why you did it. The time for contemplation is not at the edge of the diving board, because going back down the ladder is worse than the distance to the pool. I also kind of feel like, unfortunately, we live in a space where hate runs rampant, not just on the internet, but in real life. And it's important to remind ourselves this is a TV show. It is not real, although it is dealing with real issues, and it's meant to generate and provoke conversations and emotions. We have to contextualise that this is fiction. Wow, well said. That answer could also apply to another of your recent projects, the movie Hunt. Yeah, that's promoting his movie. We don't need to talk about that. Wow, my voice is so weak from reading that. So, let's talk about this Watchmen TV show. Basically, no Rorschach, no Dr. Manhattan. That pisses me off, because it seems to me he was told he couldn't use them, so he doesn't. But also, on the other side, because I'm a well-balanced guy, even if I do say so myself, I believe this is kind of a bit like Star Trek 2009, where that kind of, it all exists. It's brilliant. All the comics exist, the film exists 30 years before, and now they're telling a new story. I like that element. I also am very interested because what he's doing with racially motivated and this liberal president who had his heart in the right place does all these things, but the world gets fucked up because of it. The greatest of attentions, right? What is it that Jonathan Kent says in the Smallville finale? The road to hell are paved with good intentions. A brilliant saying, actually. He's not the one who created it, but I just remember it in the Smallville finale. So obviously there's a lot of hot topics in this, but as the interviewer said, they're not making moralising judgments like they do in other shows. So although I'm pissed off because the original characters are not going to be in it, but why aren't they in it? Probably because they're going to make another movie. Maybe part of the DCEU, who knows? And who would be involved with that? Who would direct that? I know what you're thinking, Zack Snyder. So, look, I'm disappointed that the original characters are not going to be in this show. But still, I'm kind of intrigued what kind of show we're going to get. It looks very dark, very interesting, very HBO, and I really, really can't wait to see it. Oh boy, was that a long interview. And finally, Diane Nelson, the former head of DC Entertainment and DC Films and DC Content at Warner Brothers, has spoken out. Now, Diane Nelson left for personal reasons last year, but we know she was removed by Warner Brothers after the Justice League kerfuffle, right? A lot of people always assume that she was good friends with Jeff Johns. They had a great working relationship. So as usual, every time she posts something, the Snyder fans, the DCEU fans get in on her. I mean, personally, I don't think it's cool to attack people online, but never mind. So this person attacks her and goes, yeah, basically, yeah, you're just too busy trying to please your friend Jeff Johns. Which she responds, he's no friend of mine. He's no friend of mine. So this is very, very interesting, isn't it? It's all coming out now, isn't it? Everyone's leaving everyone behind. So let's look at this situation. What was going on at the DCEU, the DC World of Films, for A Man of Steel? Chris Nolan comes in this Godfather role. He brings in Zack, he brings in Deb, he brings in Ben Affleck, right? Who's running the DCEU? Well, everyone. Christopher Nolan, he's got this Godfather role. Zack Snyder is creating this arc. You've got Chris Terrio and David S. Goyer kind of forming this arc. You've got Jeff Johns, you've got Diane Nelson at the very top. There's too many people running it. And there's other names as well. So you've got all these people. So what happened was, after the Wonder Woman movie and the build-up to Justice League, after Zack left, there was a Vulture interview with both Jeff Johns and Diane Nelson, where they were sitting very cosy together, and they looked like good friends. And they were talking about the DCU thus far. Jeff Johns, now I actually kind of did a fist thing, thinking, yeah, Jeff, you're talking a lot of sense. Because I didn't realise what was going on behind the scenes. But in that interview, he says, I did warn them, even at Man of Steel, not to do what they were doing. I thought that the DC film should be inspirational. Basically, Jeff Johns was publicly throwing Zack Snyder under the bus to bring the mainstream in to watch Justice League, to tell him, this is going to be a colourful movie. This is the movie you want. Of course, it wasn't the movie anyone wanted, because it was an absolute mess, because they took somebody else's creation, cut it to pieces, and added some new bits. It just didn't work. You could tell it was a mess, and it was rushed. The stuff they redid was rushed. So you had this mess. So who was going to pay the price for it? Diane Nelson, Jeff Johns. Well, Jeff Johns isn't really involved centrally in running DC content anymore. And I'm talking about live action content. He's still at DC. He's still writing comic books. And he's even been given his own film company. And apparently he's still developing the Green Lantern Corps movie, which I think he could do a really good job at. There's lots of accusations against Jeff Johns from fans that he that he gave Kevin Feige the script for Batman v Superman, and that's why Captain America Civil War is so similar to BVS. There are a lot of accusations, unproven accusations, of course, but her saying he's no friend of mine, it's not like she said we were just professionals. That doesn't mean hate. But what does mean hate is he's no friend of mine. So it looks like in the end, all these people fell out. Zack Snyder quit because they kept on telling him to go back and tone down his script. They brought in Joss Whedon. They threw Joss Whedon under the bus. Then they threw Diane Nelson under the bus. And what happened was too many people were running the show and it didn't work. But of course, it's very, very interesting that Diane Nelson has come out and responded to Snyder fans and said, he ain't no friend of mine. What it proves is that the inception of the DCEU, there was too many chefs cooking the dinner. And that's why it went wrong. Now we have one guy, Walter Hamada, working with Peter Safran. They're a good team. They're working at New Line Cinema. Things are going really well, and things will get better and better and better. It's great to look back, but it's not a good thing to keep on looking to the past. It's happened. It didn't work out. Now it is working out, and let's just look forward to the great future of the DC world of movies.